I didn't lift a finger. This is what the end looks like.
I'm Daniel Torres, and for 17 years, I ran my father-in-law's investment firm like some kind of financial sorcery that never failed. We're talking serious returns here, billions in profits, zero losing quarters over nearly 2 decades. The kind of performance that makes Wall Street veterans question their entire careers while wondering if they should have actually learned how markets function instead of just memorizing networking tactics at expensive restaurants. I was the silent mastermind behind everything, while everyone else pretended confidence could replace actual skill. Spoiler, it absolutely cannot. Richard Sterling, my father-in-law and supposed financial genius, paraded around Manhattan like he'd personally invented investing, taking credit for my work while I sat in my office crunching numbers and making strategic decisions. You know the type: designer suits, watches worth more than cars, ego requiring its own area code. He loved announcing at cocktail parties that his son-in-law managed his fund, wearing this smug expression like he'd just cured a disease or discovered a new continent. I'd stand there with my drink, mentally correcting him. Your son-in-law doesn't just manage your fund, Richard. Your son-in-law is the fund. Massive difference. Without me, Sterling Investments was basically just expensive branding on a building and a bunch of people who photographed well but couldn't interpret financial statements if their vacation homes depended on it. For 17 years straight, I maintained this charade. I arrived every morning at 6:30, consumed coffee that tasted like it was brewed in Hell's break room, and made Richard Sterling look like the smartest investor in Manhattan. I analyzed market trends, forecasted economic shifts, restructured investment portfolios, and basically performed financial wizardry, while Richard took 3-hour lunches complaining about his golf performance. The man invested more energy selecting neckties than understanding bond yields. But who's tracking? Our clients placed their trust in us, well, in me specifically, though they didn't realize it. Pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds from countries whose names I couldn't pronounce after cocktails. They all believed Richard was some investment oracle, whatever ridiculous title CNBC assigned him that particular week. Meanwhile, I pulled all-nighters running financial models, stress testing scenarios, ensuring Mrs. Patterson from the teacher's retirement system could actually retire someday instead of working retail into her 90s. Then came the explosion. And when I say explosion, I mean the type that makes historical disasters look like minor incidents at children's parties. It was Tuesday. I remember precisely because Tuesdays meant my regular call with the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I genuinely anticipated it because Scandinavians appreciated competence. Richard lumbered into my office, and yes, lumbered is accurate because the man had discovered pastries in his 60s and never recovered, wearing his permanent scowl like someone had etched it there with rusty silverware. "Daniel," he announced without pleasantries, because Richard Sterling considered basic courtesy something lesser people practiced. "My son Tyler will replace you as Chief Investment Officer. Clear your desk by Friday." My brain completely short-circuited for several seconds. Tyler Sterling. The identical Tyler who'd once asked me with absolute seriousness if NASDAQ was a musician during family dinner. The same Tyler who thought portfolio diversification meant maintaining both checking and savings accounts. The identical Tyler who'd failed his licensing examination 3 times and only passed the 4th attempt because I'm 90% certain he cheated. I maintained my poker face, though. Years managing Richard had taught me that displaying emotion was like showing vulnerability to hunters. It just encouraged them. But mentally, I was having an entire conversation that went something like, "Sure, Richard, brilliant idea, fantastic. Let's install the Titanic captain's incompetent relative in charge of navigation. What could possibly go wrong? While we're at it, why not have a golden retriever perform neurosurgery? They're very enthusiastic." Richard stood waiting for me to beg or perhaps cry slightly, because that's what he wanted. He wanted me groveling, admitting I needed him more than he needed me, validating his pathetic power display. But I refused him that satisfaction. Instead, I nodded slowly, like genuinely considering his brilliant decision's wisdom, and stated, "Interesting selection, Richard. Very bold." He seemed confused by my composed reaction, which was hilarious because Richard Sterling understood calm reactions about as well as toddlers understand quantum mechanics. He cleared his throat, puffed his chest like intimidating a mirror, and added, "This has been developing for a while. Tyler's ready. He's been learning the business." Learning the business. The kid had been learning for 5 years and still couldn't explain what PE ratios were without consulting Google. But sure, Richard, he's totally prepared to manage $2 billion in client assets. This will definitely end spectacularly. I should probably invest in entertainment futures because this show will be legendary. When does Tyler start? I asked, my voice so neutral it could calibrate scientific instruments. Monday, Richard said, already turning to leave because he'd delivered his judgment, and kings don't linger hearing peasants' opinions. Monday, I repeated, watching him lumber toward the door. That gives him, 4 days to absorb 17 years of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and market expertise? Generous timeline, Richard. Truly generous. He paused at the doorway, and momentarily I thought maybe a single neuron had fired in that expensive haircut, and he'd realized what catastrophically stupid decision he'd just made. But no, Richard Sterling didn't do self-reflection. Instead, he grunted something resembling, "You'll train him," and vanished down the corridor. I sat there surrounded by 17 years of Bloomberg terminals, client documentation, market reports, and various awards Richard had claimed credit for, and started laughing. Not happy laughing. This was the laughing that happens when something is so absurdly, cosmically idiotic that your brain can't process it otherwise. Tyler Sterling, Chief Investment Officer of a multi-billion-dollar fund. This wasn't merely a mistake. This was the Hindenburg, Titanic, and New Coke combined into one gorgeous catastrophe. And I had front row seats. The best part? I didn't need to do anything except watch it burn. Sunday dinner at the Sterling family mansion in the Hamptons was always expensive torture, but this particular Sunday promised exceptional entertainment. The mansion itself was so ridiculously enormous that even ghosts probably had personal assistants and retirement plans. 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a wine cellar that could function as a nuclear shelter, and enough marble flooring to make ancient Greek temples envious. Richard had purchased it during the dot-com boom to prove he'd succeeded, which is wealthy people code for having more money than taste. I arrived in my Audi, understated, classy, the type of vehicle that whispers success instead of screaming it like Richard's ridiculous Ferrari he couldn't drive competently. Sophia, my wife, sat passenger side doing her pre-family dinner ritual, deep breathing exercises like preparing for combat, which honestly wasn't far from reality. Sunday dinners with the Sterling family made medieval political dramas look like pleasant brunches. We entered through the massive front door. One of those doors requiring actual effort to open, like entering a fortress instead of a beach house. The smell immediately hit me. Expensive cuisine prepared by someone who'd probably trained in Paris and was now stuck cooking for people who considered ketchup a vegetable. The Sterling family was already assembled in the dining room like some wealthy recreation of the Last Supper, except everyone was alive and nobody was getting betrayed. Well, except me, but I'd already been betrayed Tuesday. So this was really more Richard's victory lap. Richard sat at the table's head, naturally, because God forbid anyone forget who was supposedly in charge. His wife Catherine perched beside him like expensive decoration, the type of woman who'd had so much cosmetic work that her face looked permanently surprised by everything. Tyler was already there, working on what appeared to be his third wine glass, which explained the slightly glazed look in his eyes. The kid drank like trying to forget something, which was ironic because with his track record, forgetting was actually his superpower. "Daniel, Sophia!" Richard boomed, standing like greeting visiting dignitaries, instead of his own daughter and the son-in-law he'd just fired. "Come sit! We have news to celebrate!" Sophia shot me a look clearly saying, "What news?" Because apparently Richard hadn't bothered informing his own daughter that he'd just destroyed my career like it was a sandcastle, and he was a toddler with anger issues. Typical Richard. Communication wasn't his strength. Neither was empathy, self-awareness, or basic human decency. But who's keeping track? Dinner started with meaningless small talk, the kind of empty chatter wealthy people use, avoiding discussing anything real. Catherine asked about our apartment. Tyler mumbled something about a girl he was seeing who worked in marketing or PR or something. Richard complained about his golf game, apparently suffering because his new caddy didn't understand his system, which I'm certain was code for "I'm terrible at golf, but need someone to blame." I stayed quiet, pushing around some elaborate salad with more ingredients than my college chemistry set. Sophia noticed my silence and leaned over, whispering, "You're being strange. What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, smiling that smile I'd perfected over years. The one saying everything's fine while my brain screamed your father is an idiot and we're all doomed. Just tired from the week. You know how it is. She didn't buy it, but before she could press further, Richard stood up, tapping his crystal wine glass with a fork like making a wedding toast. Everyone stopped eating, forks frozen midair like some expensive freeze frame. This was it, the big announcement. The moment Richard would reveal his masterstroke of genius that would definitely end in tears, bankruptcy, or both. Everyone, Richard began, his voice dripping with confidence that only comes from being spectacularly wrong about something and not knowing it yet. I have wonderful news. As of Monday, Tyler will be taking over as Chief Investment Officer of Sterling Investments. The silence following was so thick you could have cut it with those fancy knives. Catherine's permanently surprised face somehow looked even more surprised. Sophia's fork actually clattered onto her plate, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. Tyler, already tipsy, raised his wine glass like he'd just been promoted to assistant manager at a fast food restaurant and was genuinely proud. "Dad," Sophia started, her voice tight, "what are you talking about? Daniel is the CIO. Daniel has always been the CIO." "Was the CIO," Richard corrected, sitting back down with a satisfied smirk that made me want to throw my expensive salad at his expensive face. It's time for new leadership, fresh perspectives. Tyler has been preparing for this moment his entire life. His entire life. The kid was 32 and still didn't know how to tie a proper Windsor knot without YouTube tutorials. But sure, Richard, he's totally been preparing for this moment. Just like I've been preparing to become an astronaut by occasionally looking up at the sky. Sophia turned to me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You knew about this?" "Found out Tuesday," I said calmly, taking a wine sip that suddenly tasted like vinegar and poor life choices. "Wanted to see how dinner went before mentioning it." "Before mentioning it?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but not low enough. "Daniel, this is insane. Tyler can't run the fund. He doesn't know the first thing about it." "I've been learning," Tyler interrupted, his words slightly slurred, which really inspired confidence in his ability to manage billions. "Dad's been teaching me, and I've been reading books, lots of books about investing and stuff. Books about investing and stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, your new chief investment officer." Richard beamed at his son, like he'd just cured cancer instead of revealing himself to be spectacularly unqualified for a job he was starting in less than 48 hours. "Tyler's ready. He's got the Sterling instinct, the Sterling blood. That's what matters in this business." I nearly choked on my wine. The Sterling instinct? The Sterling blood? This wasn't medieval Europe, and we weren't discussing inheriting a throne. We were discussing managing other people's retirement savings, their children's college funds, their entire financial futures. But apparently Richard thought bloodlines mattered more than actual competence, which explained so much about why he'd needed me for 17 years. I leaned forward, looking directly at Richard with a smile that probably looked pleasant, but felt like bared teeth. "Richard, let me tell you something, and I want you to really hear this because it's important. You've just made the most expensive mistake in your company's history. Probably your life, actually. But don't worry, I'll be watching from the sidelines with popcorn when it all burns down." Everyone laughed nervously, that uncomfortable kind of laughter people do when someone says something that might be a joke but probably isn't. Catherine tried changing the subject again. Tyler raised his glass in another sloppy toast. Sophia looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow the entire table. But Richard just smiled back at me, smug and satisfied, completely convinced he'd won something. And me, I kept smiling too, because I knew something Richard didn't. I wasn't joking, not even slightly. Monday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral, complete with gray skies that looked like God himself was disappointed in humanity's life choices. I showed up to the Sterling Investments offices at my usual time, 6:30 in the morning, because markets don't care about your sleep schedule, and neither do clients in Tokyo wanting answers before their lunch break. Tyler was already in the main conference room, and I use already loosely because it was almost 7 o'clock and the kid looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, threw on a suit costing more than most people's cars, and called it professional. His hair was doing that thing where it sticks up and back like a confused rooster, and he was sweating through his dress shirt despite the air conditioning being set to Arctic temperatures. In front of him were stacks of legal documents, client files, and what appeared to be a compliance manual thicker than a phone book from the 90s. He looked up when I walked in, and the relief on his face was almost sad. Almost would have been sadder if he hadn't been complicit in taking my job. "Daniel!" he practically yelped, standing so fast he knocked over his coffee cup. Thankfully, it was empty because watching him explain coffee stains on a $100 million client agreement would have been comedy gold, but also probably illegal. "Thank God you're here. I've been looking at these files since 5 this morning, and there's a lot here, a lot." That's generally what happens when you run a multi-billion-dollar investment fund, I said, setting down my bag and grabbing my own coffee from the break room. There's paperwork, regulations, clients who expect you to know what you're doing. Revolutionary concept, I know. He missed the sarcasm completely, which was Tyler's superpower. Being oblivious to everything, including social cues, market trends, and apparently the concept of preparation. Right, yeah, no, I get that. But maybe we could co-manage, like work together, transition period and all that. I took a long sip of my coffee, which tasted like it had been brewed in a parking lot, but was still somehow the best part of my morning. Listen carefully, Tyler. Clients with $2 billion don't want a group project. This isn't high school chemistry where you can slap both names on the lab report and hope for a B. These are pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds. They want one person in charge, and that person needs to actually know what they're doing. His face fell like I just told him Santa wasn't real and also his dog died. But Dad said, "Your dad says a lot of things," I interrupted, sitting down and pulling up my Bloomberg terminal because, even though I was technically fired, the markets didn't care about office politics and I still had professional standards. Doesn't make them true. Now, you've got your first client call in about 20 minutes. The Greenfield Pension Fund. $400 million under management. They're going to ask about Q3 projections and the new infrastructure play we've been developing. You ready? The color drained from Tyler's face like someone had pulled a plug. Q3 projections? Infrastructure play? Daniel, I don't even know what. Then I suggest you figure it out, I said, not unkindly, but not exactly warmly either. You're the chief investment officer now. This is what CIOs do. They take calls from clients and don't sound like confused interns. The conference call started at 7:30 sharp. Robert Martinez from Greenfield came on the line with his usual gruff efficiency. Former Marine, no nonsense, the kind of guy who could smell incompetence through a phone line. Morning, Daniel. Got your new guy there with me. Morning, Robert, I said, gesturing for Tyler to unmute himself. Tyler Sterling is here. He's taking over as CIO. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that speaks volumes. Tyler Sterling, Richard's kid. That's the one. Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear Robert's brain processing this information and arriving at the same conclusion a calculator would if you asked it to divide by 0. Error. Right. Well, Tyler, I'll cut to the chase. We've been with Sterling Investments for 8 years. Daniel has made us a lot of money. My retirees love him, but we need to know, what's your experience? What's your strategy? Why should we stay? Tyler looked at me like a drowning man looks at a life preserver. I looked back at him with the emotional support of a brick wall. This was his show now. Time to perform. Well, Mr. Martinez, Tyler started, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. I've been learning the business from my father. He's taught me a lot about, investing and markets and things. Things. He said things to a $400 million client. Things, Robert repeated, his voice flat. Tyler, I'm going to be straight with you. Your father didn't make us money. Daniel did. And if Daniel isn't running the fund anymore, I'm not sure why we're still in it. I need numbers, strategy, confidence. What I'm hearing right now is a kid who sounds like he just learned what the stock market is last week. That's not... Tyler was spiraling, his face turning red, sweat pouring down his temples like he was running a marathon in the Sahara. Daniel is here. Daniel, can you... I'm not the CIO anymore, I said simply, examining my fingernails like they were suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. You are. Answer the man's question. Robert didn't wait. Tell you what, Tyler, I'm going to talk to my board. We'll be in touch. Daniel, good luck with whatever you do next. You're going to need it if you're leaving this circus. The line went dead. Tyler stared at the phone like it had just bitten him. He hung up. Yep. What do I do? Pray he doesn't pull his money, I said, standing up and stretching. But between you and me, he's absolutely pulling his money, probably by end of day, which means you've got about 8 hours before Richard finds out you just lost $400 million. $400 million? Tyler actually stood up so fast his chair fell over backward with a crash that echoed through the office. Several people poked their heads in to see what had died. Daniel, you have to help me. You have to call him back. You have to... I don't have to do anything, I said, calmly gathering my things. This is your rodeo now, cowboy. But hey, look on the bright side. You've only got about 12 more client calls today. What's the worst that could happen? The worst as it turned out, happened pretty quickly. By 9 o'clock, Columbia University's endowment had requested a meeting to discuss recent management changes, which was university speak for, "We're about to dump you, but want to be polite about it." By 9:30, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund had sent an email requesting clarification on leadership transitions, which was Norwegian speak for, "What the hell are you people doing over there?" Tyler was falling apart faster than a sandcastle at high tide. He kept trying to answer questions he didn't understand, using words he'd clearly just Googled 5 seconds earlier, and generally giving off the vibe of a golden retriever who'd accidentally been put in charge of air traffic control. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. Actually, scratch that. It was still funny. Predictable and funny aren't mutually exclusive. By 10 o'clock, Richard stormed into the office like a storm in a $1,000 suit, his face that angry shade of purple that always came before a meltdown or a heart attack, sometimes both. "What the hell is happening?" he roared, so loud the whole office suddenly found their monitors fascinating. "Greenfield just pulled $400 million. Columbia's ready to bolt. The Norwegians are asking questions. Tyler, what did you do?" Tyler looked like he might cry. Sad, really, but I was too busy mentally writing my "I told you so" speech. "Dad, I tried," he stammered. "I swear I tried, but they're asking stuff I don't know how to answer, and Daniel won't help me." Richard spun on me like I was personally responsible for gravity. "This is your fault. You sabotaged him." "I didn't lift a finger," I said, sipping my cold coffee, which somehow tasted like victory. "I just watched your son fail at a job he's hopelessly unfit for. You made him CIO. Well, this is what that looks like." Richard's mouth opened, probably to deliver some lecture about loyalty or family, the usual rich man excuses when their bad choices blow up. But his assistant rushed in, pale and shaken. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, the board's on line 1. They want answers about Greenfield, and Columbia just gave notice. They're pulling out too. $320 million. Richard's face drained from purple to white so fast, I thought he really might keel over. $720 million gone in under 3 hours. I sat there with my terrible coffee and thought, should have brought popcorn. This was going to be a show. 2 weeks later, the financial press had a field day. Headlines read like comedy. Sterling Investments implodes. Billion-dollar fund loses 60% overnight. Richard Sterling's son triggers market disaster. The New York Post naturally went for blood. Like father, unlike son, Sterling Investments' spectacular faceplant. They even photoshopped Tyler's face onto a crashing plane. Real classy. The collapse was brutal. Once Greenfield and Columbia bailed, the rest followed like dominoes, except each one carried hundreds of millions and made Richard look older by the day. Norway's wealth fund left. Massachusetts pension fund left. Then came the family offices, names I could barely pronounce, but whose money I'd grown for years. By the end of the first week, Sterling Investments had shrunk from $2.1 billion to barely $400 million. Most of that was Richard's own money he couldn't pull without admitting he'd sunk his own ship. Naturally, he blamed me for everything except the weather. Honestly, I was half surprised he didn't pin that on me, too. According to him, I'd poisoned clients, sabotaged Tyler, and masterminded a conspiracy to ruin Sterling Investments, which was hilarious, because all I did was show up to work and watch Tyler belly flop into professional oblivion like a diver forgetting the pool. And then came Richard's masterpiece of stupidity. He called the SEC. He actually filed a complaint saying I'd manipulated the market and broken my fiduciary duty by driving clients away. When my lawyer told me, I laughed so hard I nearly ruined my laptop with coffee, which would have been tragic since I was using it to watch Sterling swirl down the drain. The SEC took about 48 hours to shut him down. Their letter basically said, "Your son is incompetent. Clients can leave whenever they want. Daniel Torres is not the problem. Please stop wasting our time." They phrased it politely, but the meaning was crystal clear. Then came the call that changed everything. I was home on a Wednesday because when you're fired, every day feels like Saturday. When my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but answered anyway. "Daniel Torres," I said. "Mr. Torres, this is Sandra Chen from the Securities and Exchange Commission." I sat up straight. SEC calling again? Not good. "Miss Chen," I said carefully. "What can I do for you?" "We've wrapped up Mr. Sterling's complaint," she said. "No evidence you did anything wrong. In fact, your contract protected client interests properly. His complaint is dismissed with prejudice." I let out a breath. "That's good to know." "There's more," she continued. Several clients who left Sterling Investments have contacted us. They asked for your information. We can't officially refer them, but there's no law stopping you from starting your own fund. After I hung up, I sat there thinking, Richard tried to bury me. Instead, he just made me the most wanted free agent on Wall Street. His SEC stunt proved to every client that I wasn't the problem, that I was the only one worth trusting. 3 days later, I was in a conference room that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Pritchard and Associates, 3 floors of prime midtown space, with Central Park views that added at least 1 zero to their bills. Douglas Pritchard walked in right on time. Lawyers like him didn't do late. Mid-50s, silver hair, a suit worth my first year's salary, and a smile that made you think of sharks in tuxedos. Daniel Torres, he said, shaking my hand with just the right grip. I've been following your story. Sterling's implosion is the hottest gossip in Manhattan. Well, that and the Mets. But the Mets always disappoint, so your mess is far more interesting. Glad to provide entertainment, I said, sitting back, though I'm not sure why I need a securities lawyer. The SEC already cleared me. You don't need me for them, Pritchard said, flipping open a thick folder. You need me because Richard Sterling is about to sue you. 2 weeks, maybe less. And when he does, you'll want me standing between you and whatever bargain bin lawyers he can scrape together. Before I could say a word, Pritchard's assistant knocked, then walked in with a man I half recognized from client meetings. Robert Martinez, Greenfield Pension Fund, the first big client to walk when Sterling Investments collapsed. Daniel, Martinez said, dropping into a chair without waiting for an invite. Guys like him never asked. Nice to see you away from the chaos. Robert, I said, caught off guard. What brings you here? I'm saving you a phone call, he shot back. I yanked $400 million out of Sterling because Tyler Sterling couldn't tell a stock from a bond. That money still needs managing, and my board still expects returns. So here's my offer. Join Greenfield as a consulting partner. $5 million base, 20% of returns over benchmark, and total control over strategy. I froze. $5 million base, 20% on top. That was more than I'd made at Sterling in 3 years. You want me to run the Greenfield fund? Not the whole thing, Martinez corrected. Our piece, $400 million to start. Do well, we add more. Fail, we cut ties. No politics, just results. Pritchard sat back, grinning like he knew the punchline. Robert reached out last week, he said. You're not the only one either. Several of your old clients called. They're not chasing Sterling anymore. They want you. Several? I asked. 7, Pritchard replied, sliding a folder across. Greenfield with $400 million. Columbia's endowment with $320. Norway's sovereign fund with $200. 3 family offices worth another $300. And 2 private equity groups sniffing around. Added up, you're looking at $1.5 billion in potential assets. I did the math in my head, and it felt like champagne bubbles going off. $1.5 billion. Enough to launch my own fund, build my own team, my own empire, without Richard Sterling's name anywhere. 6 months later, Torres Capital Management was pulling numbers so strong, reporters ran out of words to describe them. We had $3.2 billion under management, with returns that made competitors look like they were throwing dice. Sterling Investments? Bankrupt 3 weeks earlier. 30 years of Richard's legacy, gone. Then came the day in bankruptcy court. I bought Sterling Investments for $12 million, watched Richard sign it all away. He looked like a ghost, gray, drained, broken. The judge's gavel fell and his company was mine. But the real ending came a year after Richard fired me. By then, I was thriving, managing $4.8 billion, top-tier returns, my own corner office with my name on the door. Then Sophia, 8 months pregnant, told me her father was dying of pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe. She asked me to forgive him. Not for him, but for us. For our baby. That same week, Richard's son Tyler stopped by. He'd quit finance, was teaching math and coaching basketball. He looked happy, free. He thanked me for sparing him when I could have destroyed him, then said something that stuck. You and my dad are the same. You both worship loyalty and keep score of betrayal. The difference is you're smarter about where you give it. But my dad ruined himself chasing respect from people who didn't matter. Be careful. You're turning into him. That weekend, I went to Richard's cramped studio in Queens. The man who once owned a Hamptons estate now lived in 400 square feet. Cancer had hollowed him out. When he saw me, he broke down. I was jealous of you for 17 years, he admitted through tears. You made it look easy. I ruined my own company because I couldn't stand being second best to my son-in-law. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so damn sorry. Standing there holding Sophia's hand and feeling our baby kick, I realized something. Anger was just another leash he held on me. Real victory wasn't crushing enemies. It was not needing them. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. Not because Richard deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Because our daughter deserved to meet her grandfather. Because being better than Richard meant being better at life, not just better at business. Richard lived 4 more months. He held Isabella twice before passing with Sophia and me at his side. At the funeral, Tyler gave a moving eulogy about learning through failure. Torres Capital now manages nearly $5 billion. But when Isabella looks up at me, asking endless questions, I know the most important thing I manage is being her dad. Tyler was right. I could have stayed the man who crushed Richard Sterling. Instead, I chose to be more. A good husband, a present father, someone who knew the scoreboard didn't matter when teaching your daughter to ride a bike. Richard died ruined, but forgiven. That wasn't weakness, it was strength. Last week, Isabella asked why I keep Grandpa Richard's photo on my desk. I told her he made mistakes, but he loved his family, that people are complicated and success without compassion is just expensive loneliness. She nodded like she understood, then asked if we could get ice cream. So we did. Because that's what matters now, not revenge, not scorekeeping. Just ice cream with my daughter on a Tuesday, showing her that forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about refusing to let anger write your story.